Hi, I'm Dan, and welcome back to Polar Currency and video number 41. USA versus Canada versus Mexico. The Currency Smackdown 1950s, along with a little 1960s. This is the fourth video comparing the currency that the US, Canada, and Mexico has issued over the past 100 years. See the description below for the first three videos. In 2020, I started collecting world banknotes that are basically the equivalent to a US $1 value from every country. I noticed that when it came to Mexico, Canada, and the US, that all three countries' currency changed their currency at roughly the same time. So I've broken down the last century into what I'd call decade segments. The timeline doesn't exactly align, but it's close. I'll highlight who and or what is depicted, design, items of interest, colors, security features, differentiations, and maybe a few stories. The 1950s did see change for two of the three countries. One had a complete redesign. It's worth noting that I'm skipping over the 1960s, kind of. Why? Because outside of a few notes and a couple of what I'm calling one-time things, there was very little change happening with circulating currency during the 60s. So, get your straps on, we're going to get going, and here we go with the 1950s. Coming out of the war years of the 1940s, the decades of the 50s saw a huge change in prosperity for all three countries. Mexico saw their first skyscraper built in Mexico City. The 40-story Torre Latinoamericana was built. Canada started the 50s by adding a new province, with the Confederation of Newfoundland and Labrador joining the Dominion in 1949. They were technically their own country beforehand. Canada's economic prosperity also grew to where national hospital insurance was introduced in 1957. And like all three countries, the U.S. experienced huge economic and manufacturing growth, along with the population shifting from the cities to the suburbs with the baby boom. With all that change, only one country rolled out a new currency design, and that was Canada. In February of 1952, Canada got a new monarch via Great Britain with the death of King George VI. His oldest daughter would now be the Queen, the first Queen of England for almost 150 years. That meant a new issue of banknotes for Canada dated 1954 with the face of Queen Elizabeth II. The new issue got off to kind of a rocky start. A bit of background that will save time. Like the issues of 1935 and 1937, the fronts pretty much had the same design. There were differences. And all the notes have the portrait of the new Queen Elizabeth II. Even the large denominations. The prime ministers got dumped. But the colors stay the same from the 1937 issue. While the front design is beautiful, the real stars of the show are the reverses. The backs of these notes actually continued the tradition of having nickname, and the 1954 issue was no different, the Canadian Landscape Series. It's worth noting that all of the design features that I'll be depicting for the $1 are for the same for all of the denominations. So to save time, I won't be repeating for every single banknote. Okay, let's get going. First off is that the portrait is moved to the right to prevent wearing on Queen Elizabeth's face. Can't have that. The 1954s continue with English on the left and French on the right. The large Canada text block dominates the green center field, and in the background is the Canadian coat of arms that's surrounded by almost micro text built into the design, which carries below the horizontal border only with a darker shade of green. All of this surrounded by a hexagonal shaped rectangle, if there's such a thing. The black border lathe-work envelops the numerical and alphabetical denomination. Here is one design difference. The lathe work is different for every single denomination. It's kind of really cool when you see them all lined up together. Now here's where the Bank of Canada got off to a rocky start, and this applies to all of the first print run denominations for 1954. Let's take a closer look at the portrait of the young Queen Elizabeth, which was engraved by master engraver George Gunderson from a photograph. If one uses their imagination, you can see what is now called the devil's face in the back of her hair. Here's the horns, eyes, nose, and cheeks and mouth. There were rumors that this was done on purpose, but Gunderson's engraving was just that good. There was nothing malicious about it. It did cause a minor uproar, and modifications to the printing plates for all denominations were made in 1956 to exorcise the demon. This gave the 1954 issue two types, the Devil's Face and the modified version. The modified versions is what I'll be showing. For the reverse of the new 1954 issue, the officials at the Bank of Canada wanted all the new notes to feature images of Canadian landscapes that showed little or no evidence of human activity. Well, that almost worked out. They chose the final 8 images from over 3,000 photographs supplied from the collection of railways, archives, and news agencies. Normally, I wouldn't go deep on all the banknotes, but the backs of the Canadian issued 1954s, they're just too stunning to not take a closer look at what they are and where they are. The green $1 reverse depicts the Saskatchewan prairie, a scene of a rural road framed with telephone poles and a grain elevator in the distance, but the vignette is dominated by what appears to be a late afternoon sun bursting through clouds, maybe storm clouds. It's simply stunning engraving artwork. The front of this note is what the Bank of Canada calls brown red. The $2 bill is kind of an eye popper. I mean, it's basically orange, and it's a 2. Canada's national Latin motto is center bottom, reading Amare usque ad mare, which translates to from sea to sea, or du la mer for the folks in Quebec. The back of the $2 note is certainly more brown-red than orange and features a view of the St. Francois River from Upper Melbourne, Richmond, Quebec, a small town with about 3,000 people today. Notice that the clouds continue to dominate as they will for the next 7 of the 8 notes. I know you've all been waiting for this. At least I have. It's the stunning blue 5. We haven't talked about Canadian serial numbers yet. Note the 2-letter prefix number. A 2-letter prefix was added to each serial number expressed as a fraction. The upper character designates the series while the lower letter was assigned to that denomination. Each set of 10 million notes were given a different series letter, which is vastly different from the U.S. numbering system. The back of the $5 depicts Otter Falls on the Ishahik River, mile 996 on the Alaska Highway in southwestern Yukon. To me, it appears that the falls actually have some motion and in front of what appears to be mostly tamarack pine trees, at least to me. It just invites you into the scenery. And yeah, just look at the blue. The 10 has a beautiful purple color, a shade you don't see very often on banknotes. I find it interesting how the lower background text design blends into the Queen's dress. Think about engraving that. It's pretty impressive. The 10 reverse bears the engraving of Emerald Lake and Mount Burgess in Yoho National Park in British Columbia. It was based on a photograph taken from the Canadian Pacific Railway. The mountain just takes you in, but it's the details of the tree line that makes this illustration for me. The yellow-green 20 is kind of an odd color, but still stands out. I don't know, is it yellow? Is it green? The 1954 issues were printed by both the Canadian Banknote Company and the British American Banknote Company. I couldn't find any information as to why the Bank of Canada needed to employ 2 printers. The reverse is a winter illustration of the Laurentian Mountains in Quebec. The mountains are part of the Laurentian North-South Divide that runs across North America and into Minnesota. Basically, the Laurentian Divide determines where the water flows, if it's going to go to the Hudson Bay, North Atlantic, or Gulf of Mexico. It's kind of a big thing in Minnesota, kind of, but we don't have much, so there's that. The orange 50 stands out as one of my new favorite colors. Don't tell blue. The portrait was taken from a photograph when Elizabeth was princess in 1951. Take away the tiara, which was removed to distinguish the portrait from a recent Canadian stamp based on a similar photo. The striking orange 50 reverse has the engraving taken from a crescent beach in Lockport on Nova Scotia's South Shore. Really, it's just a beautiful scene. The tan 100, considered a large denomination, now has the Queen. The Prime Minister's totally got dumped. Why? I couldn't find a reason. But no worries, they come back in spades in the 1970s, so stay tuned for that. The reverse of the 100 depicts Okanogan Lake in British Columbia that's located less than 40 miles north of the U.S. border with Washington State. The sky once again dominates, but the dull color tan really doesn't do it justice. The Rose 1000 has Queen Elizabeth II wearing the Girls of Great Britain jewels that were given to her by her grandmother, Queen Mary of Teck, for a wedding in 1947. Hey, I might care about these things, but I'm also looking for filler to show the note longer. I mean, how often do you get to see a Canadian $1,000 bill? The back of the note shows the covered bridge in the village of L'Anse-Jean, Quebec, and in the background the Sanguinier River Fjord. This note is on loan from my brother-in-law again. Thank you, Greg. I really appreciate it. It's just really cool to hold any $1,000 banknote. The 1960s did see Canada roll out a new banknote celebrating its centennial of Confederation in 1967 with a $1 commemorative banknote by adding the centennial logo to the center left, which was blank. A second version with the years 1867 and 1967 in place of serial numbers was also issued to appeal to collectors. Again, that's pretty cool. The reverse prairie scene from the 1954 series was replaced with the engraving previously used on the 1872 Dominion of Canada $100 note, which shows the original center block of Parliament, which was destroyed by fire in 1916. I tell you, these crazy foreign countries with their strange and bizarre commemorative notes. That's sarcasm for those of you at the BEP who haven't watched my video on the 1901 $10 Bison note, and see the link in the description below for more on that. And to finish up with Canada, the currency had no new security feature updates during this time period. Alright, on to Mexico. Well, we've come to one of these points where there was totally no changes for the previous decade for a country. This happens a few more times, and it's true for Mexico in the 1950s and 60s. Because of this, I'll be showing the fronts and backs of the notes in fairly rapid succession. This means no disrespect to Mexican currency. Sincerely, the series design did take the win for the 1940s. It's just, we've been here and done that. For more detailed information on what these notes have, please refer to the 1940s Smackdown video with the link in the description below. Here's a review of what was circulating for currency in Mexico during the 1950s and 1960s. The front of the 1 peso has the illustration of a large Aztec calendar or sunstone. The 5 pesos is the gypsy note with the beautiful rainbow coloring background. The 10 pesos has the woman dressed in the traditional costume of the Tehuana. The 20 pesos has the portrait of Josefa, who, as you know from the previous video, I'm still kind of scared of. The blue 50 pesos depicts Ignacio Allende, who was captain in the Spanish army that turned over to the Mexican cause during the Revolution for Independence in 1810. The 100 pesos has the portrait of Miguel Hidalgo, a Catholic priest and leader of the Mexican War of Independence, and is recognized as the father of the nation for Mexico. The 500 pesos has the engraving of Jose Maria Morelos, another Catholic priest and military leader, and later president of the Supreme Mexican government during the War for Independence. Morelos is also considered a Mexican national hero. The 1000 features Cuauhtémoc, the last Aztec ruler in 1522 when he was executed by Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés. The purple 10,000 pesos bears the likeness of Mateus Romero, a former Mexican Secretary of Finance and twice ambassador to the United States for Mexico in the late 1800s. The bold reverse of the 1 peso has the Angel of Independence monument built in 1910 to celebrate the centennial of Mexico's independence from Spain. The 5 pesos also depicts the Angel of Independence monument, but it's in green and with a different lathe-work design pattern. The 10 pesos features an 1828 panoramic view of the city of Guanajuato, which is also the capital of the Mexican state of Guanajuato. The 20 pesos has the engraving of the cloister of the former St. Augustine Convent, built in 1770. That's now the Federal Palace in Querétaro, located just outside of Mexico City. The unbelievably fantastic blue 50 reverse again depicts the Angel of Independence monument surrounded by intricate lathe work. The light green reverse of the 100 pesos incorporates a coin in the center. More than likely, this is the obverse of the Mexican 20 centavos that was issued from 1943 to 1955. The 500 pesos has the engraving of the Palace of Mining in Mexico City, completed in 1813, and is considered to be one of the finest examples of neoclassical architecture in the Americas. The back of the 1000 has the amazing depiction of the Mesoamerican step pyramid El Castillo that's estimated to be about 1,200 years old. The pyramid stands about 100 feet or 30 meters high and is located on the Yucatan Peninsula in southern Mexico. And finally, the 10,000 pesos has the National Palace of Mexico, the seat of the federal executive. Since 2018, it's also served as the official residence of the President of Mexico. The building dates back to 1522. That's it for the 1950s Mexican currency. Again, no disrespect with the shortness of showing off the notes, we've just seen them already. Also, there were no new security features added. Hands down, it's a beautiful series of banknotes that circulated through the 1960s and some of them into the late 1970s, so you'll see a few of them again. With that said, on to the United States. The United States started the decade of the 1950s with changes right out of the gate with the Series 1950 Federal Reserve notes. Of course, the Bureau of Engraving and Printing still had to issue two other types of currency thanks to 80-year-old antiquated laws created by politicians with questionable priorities, maybe influenced by business owners. Just another day at the Capitol. The update would have to wait for the United States notes and silver certificates until 1953. Don't feel you have to brace yourself for these exciting and dynamic changes. I'm not bending the decades, really, I'm just combining the 1950s and 60s into one segment. There were a lot of small changes and interesting things that did happen with U.S. currency for both decades. Starting with the Federal Reserve notes, they saw a redesign with the Series 1950. It's a lot of little changes, but I'll start with the big things. The denomination and Treasury seal block on the right was reduced by about 25%. On the left, the Treasury seal got an updated design. It got reduced by 15%, and spikes were added around the perimeter. The serial numbers were also reduced by 15% and got a slightly different font. Yeah, I noticed these things. The financial obligation text was reduced in size by about 25% and is now stacked on 3 lines instead of 4. Those are the big visual changes, but there were more small changes. The signatures were moved a bit inside and down. Washington, D.C. was moved above the series year to above the denomination Treasury seal block. The 4-corner Federal Reserve Alpha designation letters were moved down and more inside. The engraving plate numbers were moved more to the outside edges, and the series year was removed on the left side and printed only once to the lower right of the portrait. The year is also now stacked below series, and the font was tweaked. Replacement notes got a new non-filled star that was reduced with the font size. The design changes were precipitated because space management was needed to allow for the new overprinting process of the series year and signatures that were now taking place in the 1950s. The $1 plates already went through this overprinting transition for the Series 1935. One would think that we'd be done with the design changes, but not quite. The portraits were enlarged for the Series 1957 and subsequent 1963 series for all 3 currency types. Lining up a 1935H series with a 1957, you can see this where the lower line hits Washington's double chin. You can also tell that there are less ruffles showing on his shirt. And by the way, whatever happened to ruffled shirts? You had the whole pirate thing, then the early 1800s, and poof, they're gone. Sorry, that's not a sidebar, just a complete random thought. With the Federal Reserve notes out of the way, the 2 other currency types saw the design changes, all with the same adjustments we just covered for the 1953 series. The new silver certificates visually are the most disappointing. The large blue denomination was changed to gray and reduced in size a bit. The $1 bill had already suffered this fate in 1935. For the United States notes, again, same changes as we mentioned, but along with those changes, the red Treasury seal was moved to the right side, but we did gain the decorative gray denomination on the left. The $1 silver certificate 1950s reverse change was an entire cluster altogether, beginning with the Series 1935G. A new official motto, "In God We Trust," was adopted by Congress in 1956, replacing E Pluribus Unum. That had been the official motto since 1782. The 1956 legislation specified that the new motto be placed on all currency, including banknotes. Wow, I can't believe they even thought about it. The first appearance of "In God We Trust" on money was the 1864 2-cent piece, although a similar version of the motto appeared in the lower right corner shield of the 1864 $20 interest-bearing note, and it states, "In God is our trust." But the first charter period of national banknotes from Florida would see the motto on paper much earlier than 1957. The reverse of all the first charter period nationals placed a version of each state seal on the back of each note. The First National Bank of Florida in Jacksonville was the first Florida bank to get a national bank charter number and issued 1875 nationals that had the state seal of Florida on the back that did bear the text, "In God We Trust." Those were the first banknotes with "In God We Trust" on any paper money. And getting back to the Series 1935G $1 silver certificate, what's curious is there was a G version without and with the motto that did not precipitate a series suffix change. The BEP just kept the presses running and slipped in the new reverse plates with "In God We Trust" on them. You'd think that would be a major change. I mean, they issued the 1935A when they made the plate numbers a whopping 1 millimeter larger. So why wasn't the Series 1935H the very first series with "In God We Trust" motto on the reverse? I have no answer, just another curiosity. All right, I really didn't want to go here, but the transition between Series 1935 and 1957 series is a hot mess sidebar. It gets strange. Series 1935 Gs were printed in 1961. They should have been 1957 series. And it gets even stranger. Going backwards, the Series 1935F with the signatures Priest Anderson also should have been a Series 1957. Those two served together beginning in July of 1957. So if the BEP was following their own policy, the Series 1935F should have been Series 1957. 1935G with no motto should be 1957A. 1935G with the motto should be 1957B. 1935H should be 1957C. 1957 should be 1957D. 1957A should be 1957E. And 1957B, really, it should be 1957F. This may be incorrect, but think about it quickly before your head hurts too much. As for the remaining denominations with "In God We Trust" on the reverse, it wouldn't be until the summer of 1964 when they really began to circulate. End of new motto sidebar. The fronts of the 1950s U.S. currency had the $1 silver certificate with First President George Washington, the $2 United States note with Third President Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln on the $5 Federal Reserve note, United States note, and silver certificate, Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the U.S.Treasury and Broadway star, on the $10 Federal Reserve note and silver certificate. The 20 has the 7th President of the U.S., Andrew Jackson. Ulysses S. Grant, the 16th President, is on the 50, and inventor, diplomat, and founding father Benjamin Franklin is on the $100 bill. The reverse of the $1 silver certificate has the Great Seal of the United States, both sides. The 2 has the home of Thomas Jefferson, Monticello. The 5 has the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. The U.S. Treasury is on the 10, and the 20 has an updated White House. Series 1934D shows the addition of President Harry S. Truman's balcony. The entire reverse is new. The White House is larger, has more trees, the flag is different, and the word "the" was added to the moniker at the bottom. The U.S. Capitol remains on the 50, as does Independence Hall on the $100 reverse. So that was the 1950s, but there were a few surprises in the 1960s for U.S. currency. It all began with a new small-size $1 banknote. The Series 1963 Federal Reserve Note $1 bill made its debut, becoming the third small-size $1 bill currency type. This spelled the beginning of the end for the silver certificate. In June of 1963, multiple silver-related acts, including the 1934, 1939, and 46, were repealed. In 1963, the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 was amended to allow for the issuance of $1 and $2 Federal Reserve notes. 1964 saw silver certification redemption for a silver dollar coin was halted. Legislation provided a 4-year redemption period, but only exchanged in uncoined silver granules. All silver certificate redemptions ceased on June 24, 1968. Past that date, any silver certificates had the same value of the Federal Reserve note, meaning they were now a fiat currency. The 1960s also saw the end of the United States notes or legal tender notes. I'm not going to go into this other than the Treasury discontinued the printing of $2 and $5 legal tender notes in 1966 and 68 and slowly began withdrawing them from circulation. This brought about the creation of another new banknote that would never be used. The Series 1966 $100 United States note was created to circumvent an 1878 law. That's a story in itself, and if you want to know more, please check out my video, Legal Tender Mysteries. The link is below in the description. I have to say, the $100 legal tender note, that red seal, I mean, come on. This is really cool, and you know I like saying it's really cool a lot. And for a quick collector's sidebar, this is one of the most undervalued notes you can get. I highly suggest you get a hold of one because there wasn't that many printed, but yet they're not that expensive. The 1960s provided the last two visually apparent changes to occur on U.S. currency that would last for the next 25 years. And for the $1 bill, nothing has changed since then. With Series 1969, the green Treasury seal design was changed and the abbreviated Latin phrase, the seal of the Treasury of North America, was changed to English reading the Department of the Treasury 1789. And on the reverse, the 1960s saw all the denominations with In God We Trust. There were no updates to any security features. The 1960s did provide the final chapter for the large denomination notes. They were formally retired and withdrawn from circulation. On July 14, 1969, the Department of the Treasury and the Federal Reserve System announced the currency notes and denominations of the 500, 1,000, 5,000, and 10,000 would be discontinued immediately due to lack of use. Well, that's the official government statement. In reality, it was probably concerns regarding misuse of these high-value bills in illegal activities such as money laundering, tax evasion, drug smuggling, organized crime, you name it. One could argue that bringing back the $500 bill would be reasonable with inflation that has occurred over time. I mean, let's look at it. In 1969, the average car cost about $2,000. Today, it's closer to $40,000. To have a $500 bill circulating wouldn't be that unreasonable. That's what Canada, Mexico, and the United States issued for circulating currency during the 1950s and 1960s. So who will be the Smackdown winner for these decades? Is it Canada, Mexico, or the United States? The winner is Canada! Yes, Canada for the second decade in a row and first two-time winner. I can honestly say it wasn't even close. No disrespect to Mexico's beautiful notes, but there just weren't any changes. Canada had the new queen, the vibrant colors, and the reverse landscape vignettes. I mean, come on. They put them firmly in first place for me. You got any thoughts or comments, disagreements? Let me know in the comments. That's it for video number 41. Up next is the 1970s, a decade of big changes for two countries. I bet you can guess which one there wasn't any changes for. As always, I appreciate your time. If you like what you see, please hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and thank you for checking in.